eSports panel. I'm Ben White, Chief Economic Correspondent for Politico. I'm writing a daily column here from the Milken Institute gathering. If you wanted to sign up for that, I also write the Morning Money column, and I write about economics, finance, politics, the Trump administration, which all means basically I write 24/7 about Donald Trump all the time. So if this devolves into a conversation about Trump, I'm happy to facilitate that. But thankfully it's not. It's a much more interesting topic, something I got to learn a lot about over the last couple of weeks. I'm by no means an expert in eSports, but I've been trying to learn about it. I'm guessing that not everybody in the room is an expert in it either, so I think we're going to try to do two things with the panel. One is give everybody an overview for just how big and just how sort of incredibly powerful this new burgeoning industry is for those who don't necessarily know all about it, and then delve into some of the issues surrounding it. The question of when are people going to get return on investment? Are these franchises overvalued? Is there going to be a shakeout? We'll try to answer some of those questions. So we'll go high level and then dig into some details as well, and hopefully if we can do those things, we'll be successful. And we'll have a chance at the end, around 15 minutes or so, for Q&A, so make sure you're thinking of questions as we go through this, and you can put them to our experts here at the end. We've got Ari Segal, who is CEO of the Immortals Gaming Club. Kristen Salvatore is Vice President, Commercial Director, eSports at Twitch, the platform. Sam Engelbardt is co-founder and partner at Galaxy Digital. Peter Levin, no longer Lionsgate. I'm supposed to announce you as, you tell them.
Managing Director of Griffin Gaming Partners.
Gotcha, okay. So these are folks who are going to enlighten us about this industry. And I wanted to start, and Rick Fox unfortunately couldn't join us. Some of you probably have followed some of the things that have been happening with him and his investments. So we're sorry that Rick isn't here, because we were going to set up the hoop and I was going to take him one-on-one, and now that's not going to happen. So unfortunate that we can't do that. But Ari, let's start with you. A couple of questions. First, you got a big announcement that you made today about an acquisition in Brazil. I want to hear about that. But then I want you to try to explain to everybody here and explain to me exactly what eSports is, what it means, what Immortals is. Give us your basic explanation. When you talk to people who really don't understand or don't know what this industry is, how do you explain it to them?
So should we dismiss the rest of the panelists and just spend 30 minutes talking?
Yeah, no, you have to do all of that in like 5 minutes.
So look,
or less.
Yeah, so we announced some news today, actually 3 news items. Number one, we announced that we closed on $30 million of new investment in capital, and obviously that's germane to this discussion because all of those investors are certainly focused on how they're going to get a return on that investment. Second, we announced the acquisition of a gaming platform, matchmaking platform in Brazil. We can talk about that too. And third, we rebranded our company from Immortals to Immortals Gaming Club, or IGC. That's the easiest and most direct to explain. The reason is we have a multi-brand strategy. So just like AEG plays in the NHL through the LA Kings brand and the MLS through the LA Galaxy brand, we play in different sports under different brands. That's actually the exception to the rule in esports. Many teams have one brand that they apply across multiple games. We find, because we focus on engagement, maybe more so than other organizations who prioritize reach, that we're able to drive deeper affinity by having a cleaner brand message to a narrower audience segment. But that creates complexity actually in the B2B community, which is critical if you're going to deliver ROI for your investors. And so in the B2B community, anytime we talk about one of our brands, say the LA Valiant, and not MIBR, our Counter-Strike brand, we're actually diluting the value of the holdco and the holdco story. And so instead, through IGC, just like AEG is able to speak to Coca-Cola as AEG, or Marriott as AEG, or the MLS as AEG, game publishers and league operators are critical stakeholders for us to develop relationships with. Having a single brand that plays to the B2B community that allows us to focus the narrative on what we're doing as a collective and then speak to individual fans through consumer-facing brands, that's the right structure for us going forward. Our acquisition in Brazil is a matchmaking platform. Esports is a massive market, and actually Peter can give you all the cool stats. His stats are cooler than mine. Yeah. But suffice to say, esports is an amazing market in and of itself. And within esports is where you're going to find the consumers that have the highest affinity and the highest potential ARPU. But it's also a very small segment of the overall games market. And if you restrict yourself to esports, we find that you're cutting off what is the absolutely most exciting, fastest growing slice of media in the world, which is the gaming business. And so matchmaking and expanding from just purely an esports team operator into a vertically integrated esports and gaming platform through this acquisition allows us to tap into that market. And I'll leave you with this. The primary form of functionality that matchmaking delivers is actually slotting someone into a match. That is the most important thing for a gamer. When they go into a game, are they going to have a good experience? Is their skill level going to be approximate with the people on their team and their team against the other team that they're playing? If you can do that well, you deliver an amazing experience and the numbers about stickiness and engagement go way up. If you do that poorly, they go way down. And so by being able to deliver a best-in-class matchmaking experience in a market where we own now 90% of the user base, we feel like we have access that is synergistic with our esports platform and also gives us a chance to deliver the best possible experience to a growing community of gamers.
Gotcha, thank you. So Peter, he teased your stats and your cool stats and the fact that you can give us the, kind of the verbal PowerPoint version of how big this is, how it compares to traditional media, movies, TV. So blow our minds with it.
Well, I'll back up too. I serve as chairman of Immortals, so and I'm proud of the fact that I helped hire this guy. But yeah, I think stepping back and looking at some of the macro numbers is astounding. So gaming is 3 times larger than the film industry, 5 times larger than the television industry. 1/3 of the world's population plays games for an hour a day. 87% of all spend on all mobile app platforms is spent on gaming. So when, spent my career kind of straddling traditional media and gaming and kind of the interoperation, between these two demographics and consuming constituencies, the note for those in traditional media or those that are in traditional sport is that it's no longer a luxury to be in gaming, it's a strategic imperative.
So Kristen, tell us a little bit about where Twitch comes in here and the role of the platform. But you could also, if you want, if people come up to you and ask you what esports is, what do you tell them? And then what do you tell them that Twitch does?
I mean, I'd say I spend 80% of my time speaking to non-endemic businesses about what esports is, right? Like that's a common conversation. Right. And almost exclusively that's coming from people who say, well, my son or my daughter watches or my nephew watches or all of, the kids at the last family gathering, everybody was playing Fortnite. What is this thing that clearly we need to be involved in, but we don't know? So let me first get a sense of whether or not everybody here understands what Twitch is. Yes? Sort of. Okay. So Twitch is a live streaming service. It's essentially a place where multiplayer entertainment takes place. So at any moment of any day, there are about 1 million people on Twitch watching someone live stream themselves doing something, some sort of content. And at the same time that they're watching that, they're able to interact live with one another and with the broadcaster. So it really is a place where it's a very lean forward experience. It's a place where people are gathering together to experience, common content, which is, arguably the best way to build fandom. And the reason that Twitch and esports are so closely linked is that the vast majority of content being broadcast on Twitch is gaming related, and a pretty large subset of that is esports content. So it really is the key place that, or the key venue for distribution of esports content.
Yeah. And my experience with Twitch has been more in the political realm. There is a political element to that, particularly, in the conservative movement, there are a lot of folks on Twitch. Is it less that now than it once was? Because when I think of Twitch, I think of conservatives yelling at people over Twitch, and maybe it's not that anymore.
It's a panoply of interesting content. So, I think one of the things that I find most interesting about Twitch is that while gaming has been sort of the core of what has driven Twitch's growth, it's very much expanding into other topics, largely because people who are interested in gaming are also interested in a lot of other stuff. Yeah.
I wonder, before we go any further, just to get a sense for the audience, first question is, how many of you have kids that you're sort of amazed that they spend a lot of time not only gaming, but watching their friends game? I know that's been my experience. You have kids that do that. Does it kind of blow you away? Yeah. And how many of you feel like you have a fundamental good understanding of what the esports industry is? Who's expert in esports? Okay, so nobody. Oh, good. All right, so we're all learning together, which is a good thing, because this has been a learning experience for me. Sam, so talk to me about, we were just having this conversation about whether esports is even sports. Is it or is it not sports? How should we be thinking about it? Or is it, entertainment? Does it need to be in the structure of traditional sports leagues or not?
Well, so full disclosure, I think I'm the one person on this panel that doesn't have a current stake in an esports team. In fact, when I was put on this panel and a couple weeks ago, Mike Milken actually called me up and he's like, so you kind of infiltrated our esports team or our esports panel. Like, well, you're the blockchain guy. What are you doing up there? So I have opinions on all of this. I haven't invested in a team yet, although I've been looking very closely at them. And I guess I'm an LP in Peter's fund, so I have a little bit of one indirectly. I think, having been a traditional media investor for the first 10 plus years of my career, I do think there has been, in the early years of esports, it seems to me like there are a bunch of traditional sports and media people that saw an opportunity and some analogies to an existing industry and an opportunity to sort of jump into that, and some assumptions were made around how this is going to work and who is going to win and what sort of moats need to be created for real value to exist. I do think there are some obvious tremendous parallels to traditional sports, and it's a competitive activity, and it's and a lot of the monetization that is occurring today and that's going to occur in the future is coming from the same revenue stream. So you're going to see for sure, ad revenue, merchandising revenue, ticket sales, content creation and marketing, and brand, sponsorship, of course. So I think all of that it draws a lot of analogies to sports. The one area that for me is really interesting is just trying to figure out whether these, to the extent some of the people have taken this approach of paying franchise fees and joining these sort of closed leagues with the hopes of really building value within that league and in some instances in and around a particular game, versus some of the other approaches to teams have looked much more like 360 management and marketing businesses, where they're really leveraging the brands that these individual influencers are creating for themselves. And these are people with massive social reach, enormous number of followers, and they're, for the most part, they're not cord cutters. They're kind of cord never people who they're not going to be on ESPN. They're never going to be on ESPN. They don't think of sports that way. And so I think that's the debate that's going on. And certainly the thing that I'm spending the most time thinking about as I look at, in terms of where to deploy capital in esports. And I know some of these people have very strong opinions about that. So
yeah, I'm guessing, Ari, you have a strong opinion on it, and I want to hear it. But I also maybe pull back a little bit and give us your story, how you came to be doing this. I think you have a background in traditional sports and the front office of that. How did you get to where you are? And then you can answer the question of whether it's a sport or not.
Sure. So how did I get to where I am? I think the best way to explain it is I have a 8-year working relationship with AEG. And I work with them in a few different contexts, some across the table, some on the same side of the table. And we developed, I think, a mutual affinity for each other in the way that we go about doing business and our vision of what sports and sports operations should look like in the 21st century and beyond. And so shortly after AEG made its investment in Immortals, which was June of 2017, I believe, I got a call from someone who I'm very close to at AEG, Chuck Steedman of AEG Facilities. He's the COO of AEG Facilities. And he said, hey, look, we made this investment. We're looking for someone like you. Are you interested? And I said, absolutely not. I know nothing about esports. I know nothing about gaming. I'm a hockey guy. Right. And over the course of a bunch of weeks and months, I became convinced that the macro trends and the fundamentals here that Peter shared earlier were A, very real, and B, unlike anything that you would see in traditional media or sport. And so the opportunity to work with people around the table, people like Peter and the Milkens and AEG, Meg Whitman, Steve Kaplan, and others that all wanted to help solve this problem together and were committed to it financially and emotionally and otherwise, seemed like a moment in time to make what looked and felt at the time like a jump, but it actually really wasn't. And I would say, kind of to your next question, segueing, I think this question about whether or not it's an esport completely misses the point.
Okay. I'm good at missing the point.
Yeah, no, it's just, and everybody asks this, and I guess the only entity that I think that should be asking it is really the IOC, and they are. But I think we as, call it 30 and older folks, have this very arm's length with our point of view about how people should be consuming media. Sure. It means one thing, and it's the same thing that it's meant for years and years. And something interesting about gaming is that, and esports, is that it's not just about who wins and who loses. That's where the story starts. But the engagement and the connection and the conversation extends so far beyond that. I mean, in Fortnite, whoever wins is not the only person that has achieved something in that game. The entire next day at school, the reason your kids are playing Fortnite, the reason they're watching their friends play Fortnite is not because they're sitting there passively. Because watching someone play Fortnite in a game in a world that you can inhabit yourself also is a social experience. And that watching is not third party. It is very first party, and it is the currency of conversation every single day at every single age demographic around the world, increasingly so. So I think we need to kind of rethink as a collective what we're actually trying to solve for here. No brand cares if it's a sport or not. No media distributor cares if it's a sport or not. And frankly, to some degree, the fans and users don't care either. They love competition. But I would ask you this. Is NBA content, the actual playing of NBA games, the thing that people love now about the NBA? Or is it more the stories of the players, the conflict, the resolution, the David and Goliath of it all? So I think you're seeing this in traditional sports too. I would say esports and gaming is actually ahead of the curve on where things are going.
I would say it is the latter in the NBA, and maybe it's just because I'm an old dinosaur. I don't happen to like that. I like the who wins and the who loses in the competition, unless who's fighting with who off the court. But when I look at social media interaction with the NBA, it is all about what you just talked about. So I guess it's a value judgment if you're like that evolution of sports or you don't like it. Ari was talking about the problem we need to solve for. I'm not sure what that problem is. I guess it's how anybody makes money off this, and whether there is an overvaluation of franchises. What do you think the problem that we're trying to solve for is that he referred to?
Well, I think, first of all, I think the notion that, the bumpy ride to ROI, it's the second pitch of the first inning of a 9-inning game here. It is so early. And I think we're fortunate to have a partner like AEG, who came in and said, look, it took us 20 plus years to build Major League Soccer, to a place where now these franchises are selling for hundreds of millions of dollars. They said, we have no interest in doing this if you're looking at a 3, 5, 7 year, time horizon on return on your investment. So, I think there's going to be some shakeup. We've seen it of late. I think that's going to continue. I don't think that's a bad thing. There's a lot of tourist capital, across the game's landscape. And I think some of that's going to shake out, and there'll be ramifications. But, the other disruptive element here is there's all these new actors that are entering the theater. And I think at the end of the day, that's a good thing for the industry writ large.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit again about Twitch and the platform situation. I'm just wondering, we talked a little bit about this, before we did the panel. There are challenges to monetizing this and making it, a really valuable business proposition for platforms like yours. Are you making money off it now, a lot of it? And if you're not, how do you make more in the future?
Well, to back Ari's point, everybody who visits Twitch spends about an hour and 45 minutes there every day. They're spending a lot of time there. Average session length is like 109 minutes. So this is a highly engaged, these people are it is where they are talking about this, right? That's part of the conversation. It's not only happening in the schoolyard, it's very much happening, on Twitch. And so, that engagement is gold for brands, really. It's very hard to find that. And so I would say in addition to being the fact that we are the place that most people are coming to talk about and watch esports, it's also where brands are, that's why I'm spending so much time speaking to non-endemic brands right now. They are seeking a way to be engaged with, millennial and Gen Z consumers who are not hanging out anywhere else talking to one another like that. So
right. So, but do you capture the revenue from those who would advertise, or is it the content owners? It seems like there's a lot of issues there.
Some of it, yeah. Twitch is it's free to view everything on Twitch. There are no paywalls, so you can be on Twitch all day long and never pay a cent if you choose. One of the things that I find so interesting about Twitch in general is this sense of altruism that exists there, and that extends to all content on Twitch. And so a lot of the revenue that flows through what we do is actually coming from voluntary subscriptions. So viewers are watching content, deciding, hey, I actually really like this and I want to voluntarily support it. So they're subscribing to channels. And then as they subscribe to channels, those channels can make more content, the audience grows, and then we're able to bring in bigger and better advertisers, so everybody gets a piece of that pie.
Okay, Sam, I wanted to just read you a stat that I pulled up when I was doing the research, and it's from Forbes, I think, and they say the top 12 esports organizations trade on an average of 14 times annual revenue. You compare that to the NBA, which is 6.5 times annual revenue, and it's more than 11.3 multiple for Airbnb when they first did a major funding round in 2017. So, are these things way overvalued at this point? I know you want to answer this too.
It's funny because this has been an ongoing dialogue between the two of us for a while now. Okay, so there are a lot of possible explanations for the fact they trade at 14 times revenue. I don't think we should discount the possibility, again, that you have a bunch of traditional media people who have been investing, as I was, in businesses that have been in secular decline for so long now that just to see anything with some growth excites them, and they're jumping on this stuff and have.
Please don't talk too much about traditional media secular decline here if you can help it.
I'm just saying,
I don't wanna
you
have
have
to
to
shoot
entertain
myself
that
by the end of this
possibility
panel.
because it can be very compelling to see something with the kind of growth and macro growth numbers that video games have broadly. I think to answer that question, we also have to kind of go back again to this. The question of the panel was, the rocky road to an ROI on esports, and actually everything that we've just heard in some ways highlights this issue of what are we talking about? Are we talking about video games? Are we talking about esports? Are we talking about content creators and influencers who are building these brands for themselves, who many of them started as professional esports gamers and then moved to being professional content creators, not playing the sport themselves anymore because to maintain their position at the top of a particular esport game and all the work that entailed and the lack of financial return versus streaming and being content creators themselves and making hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars a month, but talking to their audience in a very bottoms up way. So that's the question for me, and the idea that we're comparing esports teams that are trading at 14 times versus traditional sports leagues that are trading at 6 or however you want to look at that. You're baked into that are all of these assumptions about what role the competitive esports gaming piece of all of this is going to play in the future. If we think that it's going to move in the direction of these influencers pulling more and more of their audiences that are global and hyper engaged and spending a ton of money, like Ari said, into the particular closed leagues that are being created around these particular games, then the growth multiple will seem small. But if we think that the businesses that are being created here really are bottoms up, very viral networks of people that are following a particular creator much more than they're following a particular game, then I think we really have to reassess the multiples entirely.
Yeah, that does seem like a fundamental question, and Ari, maybe you could speak to that, the question of whether it's loyalty to the individual or to the team in the league, and the broader question of whether this multiple is sustainable.
Not only is it sustainable, it's light.
Way too small.
Light, yeah. So, look, I think it's interesting to compare esports and traditional sports often. One comparison that seems relevant to your question is Overwatch League was very novel in its approach to having geolocated franchises. So we own and operate the LA Valiant. We have an HMA, Southern California. We have exclusive rights in that HMA. The Kraft family operates the Boston Uprising in Boston in the same league, and they have similar rights. And Mark Ein here in the front row operates the Washington Justice, and he has similar rights in the DMV. And that was mind-blowing at the time. How could you take these digitally native cross-border products and restrict them to an HMA hoping to build local affinity? Well, it turns out that local affinity and tribalism transcend distribution. People really care. If I'm selling, if it's widgets or baseball or football or basketball or esports or frankly debate club, New York versus Boston, LA versus San Francisco matters more than New York versus Indianapolis. Mm-hmm. It just does. And like I always say, anyone can agree. We can all root against Philadelphia all the time, right? That's just, you don't need to know what we're doing. Philadelphia is playing, we can all agree.
My wife did not like that answer.
I'm from, that's true, they did.
While ago.
They also booed Santa Claus.
Yeah.
So,
and threw batteries at fans and players.
Ask Darren Dalton's kid. No, I'm just kidding. So, in the NBA, though, which we think of as this like uber progressive league, and it is, that's firing on all cylinders, and it is, think about the fan experience and the customer journey there. It's about the player, not about the team, and not about the market. Someone was a fan of LeBron James when he was on the Cavaliers. Well, then they became a Miami Heat fan, then back to the Cavs. Now they're a Lakers fan. And there's no judgment about that the way there would have been 10 or 20 years ago.
I have some judgment.
Yeah, but that's okay. I do too, by the way. But anyone under the age of 25 thinks
Right.
we're nuts. Why would you root for a team like the Knicks that's poorly run, never going to win, uncool? Like, that's crazy. Why
You
would
might
you
as well be
stick to
talking about the Washington Redskins, which is my team.
just because you were born there and your dad made a bad decision 30 years ago, like you're stuck with this team for life? You know? Like,
Psychologically, yes. The answer is yes. I've tried to break that addiction, but I
Well,
can't.
It's breakable. I'm a reformed Yankees fan, so it can be done.
You have to leave this panel now because I'm an unreformed Yankees fan.
So I think, and this is why we have IGC, right, is because we think that connecting a brand to a fan and an audience member in a way that is responsive to that audience member and where they are. So thinking about connection, not in the way that me and my dad thought about it for the last 50 years, but trying to think about where that 18-year-old is right now as they're making decisions. And by the way, why are brands so interested in esports? Because they're trying to understand affinity also. How can I actually get someone to commit to me, not for any single product or any single generation of product, but commit to me and be less price sensitive going forward? That's the way we're thinking about branding and connection, just like every non-endemic brand that Kristen was talking about too.
Well, and so sorry to interrupt.
Please,
you.
no,
I was
jump
going to
in.
say I'll jump in and say that's one of the most interesting things I would say that we have seen on Twitch. This is not new news that 18 to 34-year-old people are okay with advertising in a way that, frankly, older people haven't necessarily been. But it's incredible that the level of understanding that we see in our audience, that when they see an ad or a sponsor who is supporting content that they like, they actually understand, oh, if I go and I purchase that brand, I am actually supporting, like I'm making more of the content that I want to see. And so we've seen really incredible, lift in brand affinity and intent to purchase for some really brands I would never have expected. I'm not going to name them here, but brands I would never have. I'm not going to do that. But brands I would never have expected for the demographic to resonate so strongly.
And higher CPMs than on premium cable.
Right. So we're talking about this demographic that all these brands want to get after, and I don't know that you hit on that in your very brief sort of verbal PowerPoint, but I mean the demographics are hugely attractive. Talk to me a little about what they are, and then I want you to answer the question about the team valuations.
Well, I think, again, I'd back up. We were at a Milken event last summer, and it was ourselves up on a panel with the commissioner of Major League Baseball, of the NBA, and Mike actually posed a question. He said, Peter, wearing your Lionsgate hat, like, what keeps you up at night? And I said, well, I'll tell you, we're talking about these hundreds of millions of hours that are being consumed of Fortnite and Overwatch and League of Legends, now Apex. I said, you know what they're not doing when they're watching those hundreds of millions of hours of programming? They're not watching your baseball games, and they're not watching your NBA games, and they weren't watching, our films and television series, and that's just the stark reality. So, again, you talk about cord, nevers. I mean, this is a consuming constituency that will not see a cable bill.
Yeah.
They will not see a satellite bill. So, you have to figure out what is the connective tissue back to that demographic and that audience. It's growing. 10 years ago, there were 200 million gamers, 90% male. Today, there's north of 2.6 billion, again, 50% female. Right? So when you consider that, and that's without even opening up, the Indian market. That's sub-penetration, like 10% or less penetration of smart devices. The whole MENA footprint. So if you, conservatively, that's another billion of an audience that's addressable. It's just staggering figures with very attractive demographics and probably the most elusive, demographics in all of media.
Right, and you think that those are sticky numbers in terms of the media consumption and habits of people who are in that demographic now, that they don't sort of mature out of doing that? Like, I don't necessarily see my 9-year-old or now 10-year-old who loves to watch people play Fortnite and plays Fortnite and chats online with his friends about it and then talks about it the next day at school. I don't think I necessarily see him doing that when he's 16 or 18 or 22, and I don't necessarily think you'll never see a cable bill or a satellite bill. Like, don't the media consumption habits change over time? Like, are we freezing this in?
I think you'll be surprised and we'll be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
I mean, it's impossible that what he'll actually be doing is making the content himself.
Yeah.
Yeah, true. We'll see what happens if you were to do that. That could be interesting. So, I guess, what is your thought on that? The idea that this is the way that media is being consumed now, and they're engaging in these eSports, and so won't necessarily be watching MLB or NBA or NFL.
Yeah.
I mean, are they all these people in traditional sports leagues kind of screwed?
I mean, I think they better be doing a lot of soul searching. I have zero reason to believe that a generation of people that grow up consuming video games and influencer-created content on Twitch are going to like age to a certain level and then suddenly decide they're done with that and they're going to go back and to the cumbersome world of professional sports and a cable bill and all the other things that are involved with that. I mean, I think that there'll be a lot of overlap with live events, I think, because I think these same kids that are playing, that are choosing to spend more of their digital time on Twitch than watching baseball, they're still probably being raised in going to baseball games with their family, going out to sports events with their family, having a cultural experience around live sports that may translate less into sitting around at home and watching it on television, but I think will still carry into their lives and their lives with their families and their friends and so on.
I would add to that. I mean, I think you're actually seeing, which is great, a lot of owners of traditional sport leaning in to esports and trying to figure out what is my entry point into this conversation. I think NBA's done a fantastic job with NBA 2K. I think MLS, FIFA, UEFA, the way they've embraced soccer and football, Formula One. So I think you see a lot of ownership from traditional sport. They're both intellectually curious about it, but they also, again, understand it's no longer a luxury. They have to practically apply what it is that they're doing and figure how to interoperate and engage this audience and drive the connection back and forth. I think Ari can speak to the way that we've engaged with AEG and some of the activation that we have done there and the way they are leaning into it. I can tell you just from the conversations we've had with their sales teams, like they're thrilled to be out there selling traditional inventory of media coupled to this very attractive basket of rights around esports. For marketers, it's a soft landing. They can say, okay, well, we're buying traditional soccer and hockey and basketball, and we also get to blend this in, and they can do it with a little bit of a buffer around it. But maybe Ari, you want to speak to some way on that?
Yeah. So, and also just remember, I mean, we're talking about kind of a distributed media pie as if it's fixed, but the reality is, when I grew up, there was a TV, and if I was watching it, I was watching it. But that's not the way people consume media now. Sure. So the pie is just growing massively. Not everything has to be zero sum, I guess. I think there's growth available for everybody. As it relates to kind of audience cross-pollination initiatives, we see it being like a totally untapped potential market. And we've done it not just with sports, but actually also with other forms of content. We did it with Lionsgate. So I'll give two examples. One, we did this promotion with Ash vs. Evil Dead, which is kind of a campy, stars, horror-ish show. Now, like contextually related to esports, but definitely not about gamers, definitely not about gaming, definitely not like licensed IP from a publisher. And what we did was we had this two-phase live event activation. So we had Ash vs. Evil Dead fans come to an LA Valiant game to see the LA Valiant, but also to meet the Ash vs. Evil Dead cast. So we had cast members in attendance. They interacted with LA Valiant fans there, as well as the cast vs. Evil Dead and cast of Ash vs. Evil Dead, and we saw significant lift in fandom after that event. But interestingly, so did Ash vs. Evil Dead. Conversely, we had an event at Lionsgate where we had our players at a private screening of Ash vs. Evil Dead prior to the premiere, and invited our fans to come to that screening. And there was additional lift for LA Valiant and for Ash vs. Evil Dead. And so if you step back and you say these are completely different forms of media, these are unrelated kinds of content, why would the audiences blend together? And the reason is because people go to events and engage in things for a reason other than that thing itself. There's this entire community aspect. And so we experienced it and had some great success with Lionsgate, and we've done the same thing with AEG, integrating with some of their players. By the way, every player on the LA Kings and LA Galaxy plays video games. Yeah. In fact, if you ask their coaches, too much. But we've done cross-promotional activity prior to our playoffs last year where we had the LA Valiant go on the field at a Galaxy game work with the LA Galaxy players before a game on training and flexibility and other things. We brought our fans in to share in some of that content. Those are the kind of things that, for both sides, the Galaxy and for the LA Valiant and their respective fan communities, you can't get that kind of content out there, and it makes you feel part of something even bigger.
Right.
So we think that's a huge growth opportunity.
It's not at all a surprise to me, by the way, any of the lift that you saw there. Like we're keenly aware on Twitch of the Venn diagram between gaming and sports, but also gaming and music, gaming and film, gaming and cooking. Turns out that gamers are really interested in cooking shows.
So like you do a live British baking show and then bring in.
We have done similar things to that, actually.
We have a franchise called Gamer Snacks. It's two of our players cooking snack recipes in a kitchen, one from Canada, one from South Korea, so it's celebrating the globalism of esports and gaming. We get 20,000 people watching it every single week. It costs us almost zero to make, and the completion rate on that, it's about a 10-minute video, is 84%, which is significantly above YouTube's general completion rate average for content of that length.
I would just like to say the completion rate on my podcast is 98%. So some of you wanted to
What's
sign up
the
for
audience
that.
size though? You, your mom, your dad, your kids.
Ouch. No, the audience size is everybody in the White House and Treasury and Congress and the rest of Capitol Hill. So it's not necessarily the size of the audience, but it is the quality of that audience that is
that why
important.
Senator
And
Cornyn had an earbud in this morning?
That's exactly why he was listening to last night's Milken podcast after he'd read last night's Milken column. So I mean, I do want to, and anybody can answer this, because I don't quite understand if this thing is moving in the direction of these live events where people go to an arena and watch people play these games, or if it's in their homes doing it. Like my kid has never come up to me and said, I want to go to, I don't know where he would do it in the New York area, but if he was out in LA, I don't think he'd say I want to go to the Staples Center and watch people play video games. Maybe he would. Is it a live events thing, or is it purely like you are doing it in your home or with your friends or whatever?
That's part of the beauty of it. It's all of it. Right? It is very much a lifestyle that they're engaging in. Though your son, may not, and mine probably doesn't perfectly fit the profile. Tens of millions of them do globally, and I think that's one of the interesting dynamics relative to esports in the United States, because typically we're the tip of the spear with respect to any kind of an emerging media, but we were late to the game, right? So it was the markets that commoditized bandwidth first, like Korea. It was markets where Twitch took off first, who had zero console penetration. So you're talking markets the size of China, Brazil, Eastern Europe. And a lot of people who were looking at Twitch early on would say, they're buying traffic. This is cheap traffic from these suboptimal markets. It's like, no, these are people that are going to gaming cafes to play, to watch, to consume. So I think for us in the States, it's been a little bit of a learning curve. For those of us that are old school with competitive gaming, it's not at all surprising. But I think the lifestyle component to it, again, if you go to any of the Overwatch matches, here locally, and you understand kind of that 360 approach and engagement, it's very discrete to esports. There are very few competitive activities that port globally, right? So you've got soccer, football, you've got martial arts to a degree. Mike Milken pointed out the other day, dance, so I guess dance is a global competitive thing. And then you have esports, right? So to be one of those 4 or 5 things that port globally, competitively, with the type of engagement metrics that they're just unprecedented. It's very, we talk a lot about these comps to traditional sport and traditional media. I think you have to park some of those tropes. So there's a completely different lens that you're going to look at this through. You can apply some of that, I think, forensically, but try to address some of it with a clean palette, because I think it'll better serve, what we're experiencing.
I mean, you're better off.
I was going to say the digital experience is not a passive one in this case, right? Which is a big difference. So it's not necessarily apples to oranges to compare the digital experience and the live experience. Right. There's a lot of crossover.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's also the again, where sports is limited in understanding what's going on here. I mean, these gamers, whether they're the professional athletes or the influencers and the people creating this content, I mean, their reach is global. It's massive. They really are. They're the Beatles. They're this generation's rock stars, athletes, politicians, actors, all really combined. And they're playing a different role in different times depending on what content they're creating or where they're being viewed. But so they become all of these things. And so I think it seems highly likely to me that as you continue to have individuals who have this level of fame and fan base, that they're going to, of course, be able to draw people out to live events and to bring people together to collectively experience what they're doing. And particularly, the more time people spend digitally, I think that we are seeing, again, so many of these things that are counter-programming to the intensive alone digital time that people are spending are doing great right now. And I think because there's that balance where people do want to get out and interact with other people in physical environments too.
Yeah, let me ask you, in a few minutes we're going to take some audience questions. I'm sure there's so much here to try to unpack and understand, and I do want to get your questions. But one thing that came up as I was reading about it is you talk about the superstars, the influencers, the giant players who can draw people out, and where kids watch their videos all the time. But there's lots of players involved here who are not at that level, and there's concerns around how they're treated and whether they're just sort of cast aside if they're not on a team anymore. And talk to me a little bit about do they need to unionize? Like, how do you deal with all of this universe of players in your league who are not the superstars, and are they treated fairly?
So from the founding days of Immortals, so before my time, I think most in the industry would tell you that we were among the first, if not the first organization to shine a light on just this issue. And when I joined Immortals and I talked to counterparts around different teams, players were still being paid in cash at times, not in our company, but in others, with very limited contract enforcement and rights. There's been some agents that have come or that have taken on eSports practices. I think that's probably a good thing. My personal point of view is that players will unionize. I think that's probably going to happen sooner than thought, and maybe sooner than it should, because the other side of unionization and the negotiating for wages, hours, conditions of employment is probably in a sports context that teams get more control. And so I would raise my hand and say, if I have 4 years of control over a player, and there's going to be contractual minimums or whatever else, I'm all in for that. And in fact, we already, I think, have the longest average contact length in Overwatch League. There is always going to be a chase of following where things are going and making sure that you're being vigilant about how you treat players. I would turn that question back to every single other pro sports league. What is the NFL doing for its retired players,
Sure.
for its players that actually receive a pension? There was something like, I don't even know the number, but hundreds of undrafted players from the last week's NFL draft that now have nowhere to go and no league to play in. What are the leagues doing to take care of those players? On the other hand, they restrict players from entering the league until 3 years after they graduate. And that's probably because the Players Association is primarily concerned with existing players, and more young players into the league would cost veteran players jobs. So this is all a very long way of saying we will always be at the tip of the spear in improving the conditions for players. That is just an operating cost that we assume, and in fact one that we embrace, and we view it as an opportunity to differentiate because we want to have a best-in-class program for our players. We think that will help us recruit and retain talent over time, and that's also something that fans want increasingly. So we think it's totally double bottom line. Others will lag behind, and we will try to drag them forward.
Yeah, Peter, sort of the same question to you about the treatment of players and the unionization and when that might happen and what it would mean for the industry.
I think Ari answered it extremely well. I mean, I do think, even prior to his joining, we definitely wanted to be setting ourselves apart, from the pack, that this is something that's incredibly important to us. I think also, inclusion, gender inclusion, LGBTQIA. We were the first ones to wear, a patch on our, I can't believe I got that acronym right.
Well done.
But,
You get the woke badge at the end of this.
Yeah. By the way, I also co-teach an eSports class at the USC. So, and my students, if they have the little e, big S, that's half a grade off. So it's actually big E, little S. But it is. It's a source of frustration.
There's a whole Slack channel on that at Twitch. You'll be happy to.
It's a truism.
Specifically about spilling. Yeah.
But I think also trying to be a thought leader, like I said, it's so early. So I think as long as you're open to that dialogue, no one's digging in. I think to Ari's points, there's a lot of anecdotes regarding leagues that have been around for decades, where it hasn't been ironed out. I do think you've got a contemplative quality of exchange between players and ownership, where we can again learn from some of the mistakes of leagues past, and it's all about that quality of exchange and communication. So it's early, but again, I think you articulated it as best you could.
Yeah, and feel free to answer that, Kristen, but I wanted to ask you about, behavior on the platforms and interaction between fans. I mean, I've certainly, in compiling the research, read all the stories about, abusive behavior and people getting banned from platforms. Like, how much of a risk to that is, how much is that a risk to the entire operation? How do you police it? Talk to us about that.
Well, Twitch actually has pretty restrictive terms of service with regard to the behavior on the platform, and a really robust some robust auto moderation tools, but also the community is pretty robust about moderating itself.
Yeah.
And so, that said, there are a lot of people. There are 1 million, 500,000 people broadcasting at any given time, and so we can't be watching all of them. But certainly, we take very seriously the commitment, I would say, that our broadcasters make to contributing positively to the community in esports and every other content avenue.
Yeah,
So.
I guess I would put that question to you too, Ari, in terms of the players themselves and how they comport themselves. And I've read some stories about some nasty comments and people getting banned and that sort of thing. Like, does that worry you? Like the way that some of the players behave online and interact with each other?
Look, I think anyone that has in their custody 30 individuals under the age of 25 that like their brand or reputation are tied to has some sleepless nights thinking about that. Yeah. Look, the way that we're building our company and have since its founding days and continuing into the future is one of natural self-selection. So we communicate to the market, to our fans, to our corporate partners what our standards are. That doesn't mean that everyone has to share those things, but we aim to build the most inclusive and diverse and connected community of gamers around the world. We aim to solve issues like gender disparity and address things like sexual orientation. And we do that not in a patronizing way, but very genuinely in a 360-degree way. We have live events that are focused on these things, like, for example, a party at LA Pride. We have events that brand partners will underwrite, like our Girls in Gaming Summit presented by Microsoft, which was distributed on Twitch. We wore a rainbow patch in competition, not in the warm-up, in the actual on-stage competition. So someone or some people that disagree with those kind of values tend not to be fans of our team. And like I said in the beginning, we're okay with that because we're solving for engagement, not necessarily reach, but we also believe that there are these underserved communities in gaming and that we can be, at worst, the second favorite team of all of those underserved communities. Because even if you're from Boston and you're rooting for the Boston team, if you are a person of color, if you are a woman, and we're the only team in the league that's doing first-party content focused towards you and your audience and speaking directly to your life experience, not me doing it, but someone who looks and acts and has similar life experience to you, we think there's a chance to build a connection. And unlike our generation, there's room for people to have second and third favorite teams.
I like that you say our generation. I feel like I'm probably 15 years older than you or something, but
I'm an old soul.
I'm happy to take part in that generation. We're going to take audience questions in just a second, but I want to end my questioning to Sam. Who, as you make this decision, you're the panelist who is like trying to figure out where to put money to work here. How are you going to make that decision? And how long a time horizon do you see for this turning into like super profitable business for everybody?
I think we got to define what this is.
Yeah.
So I've been investing pretty heavily across infrastructure related to gaming broadly. So I'm going to continue to do that. And there's a lot of stuff to do there that is going to very directly impact everything that the esports conversation we've been having, whether we're talking about, again, streaming content and influencer created content or professional esports. So I think it's a wonderful time to be investing in those businesses now and to be really helping to build the infrastructure of gaming broadly. I would say I'm just too fascinated by esports itself that I would be shocked if I haven't made at least one investment in esports in the relative near term. Mm-hmm. I just think at some point I'm the kind of investor that likes to get deep into the businesses that I'm looking at, and the best way to do that is to put some money on the line and really dig in and understand it. And so I've been fortunate to get to know so many great people in the space, including the panelists up here. So So no, I'm going to invest, but with my eyes open. And I mean, even just the last thing that Ari was talking about and a few of the other panelists, just in terms of these audiences. And I mean, it's so fascinating because it has never been more critically important to get everything right about these, the demos and really making sure you're speaking to people in the way that they expect to be spoken to, and to actually, like, these audiences can be so fickle, and if you get this stuff wrong, I mean, they vote with their fingers now, and they'll click off as quickly as they were clicking on it. So I think it's really interesting as you build this more than any media business I've seen before, where the timing, you just have so little time to really to really make sure to both to build and to lose an audience. So. It's fascinating.
Yeah. So this is a lot to take in, a lot of angles we could come at it from. I'm sure that there are some of you who have questions for these folks. Is there anybody who'd like to pose a question? If you could just tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Chai, just an avid gamer from my youth. So I'm just curious, as you think about, your original gamers, the Half-Life players, the Counter-Strike players, the World of Warcrafts, and how those folks have kind of been the, vanguard, and how did critical mass actually build to a point where it's completely socially acceptable, it's profitable, and then the second part is, have you seen that cohort of players be profitable because they are a little bit more mature, their pocketbook's a little bit deeper?
I am that cohort.
Yeah.
So I would say mobile probably played a super significant role in the proliferation of, gaming is essentially ubiquitous now. And one of my favorite games to play when I walk into particularly a non-endemic company's boardroom is people go, well, I'm not a gamer. And I say, well, show me your phone. And almost inevitably they've got, Words with Friends on there.
Candy Crush.
Yeah, Candy Crush. Something is on there.
Golf class.
And you say, okay, well, how much time do you spend playing this? And they'll go, well, I spend an hour a day. Like, not only
Third
are
of the
you a
world's
gamer,
population.
you're a hardcore gamer.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Because it's not about the content, it's about how much time you're spending and arguably how much money you're spending. So I'd say mobile played a huge role in making gaming ubiquitous. Your second question was, is that cohort profitable? Well, I mean, I think the money flowing through gaming probably speaks for itself, but I'll pass it to you to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're talking earlier just about how big the games marketplace is, and the four big publishers now with Activision, EA, Take-Two, and Ubisoft. In the last 6 weeks, you've had Google announce their Stadia product, you've had Apple announce Arcade, you've had Snap announce their platform, you've got Microsoft with xCloud and the Azure backbone, you've got Verizon throwing their hat into the ring. Again, Amazon, everyone's saying we're going to be the Netflix of gaming. I think Netflix is going to have a say about who's going to be.
Netflix is going to be the Netflix of gaming.
So you've got Sony. So you've got 8 of these, again, new actors that are entering the theater. I think the disruption we're going to see in gaming is going to make what Netflix and Amazon have done to traditional media truly look like child's play. So the amount of content and reach we currently have now, you're talking about all these bigs entering the fray. I think you're going to see a ton of M&A. You're going to see a ton of investment for market growth versus ROI. That's going to mean, more games are going to get better distribution. All of these services are going to need to differentiate themselves from one another. So that's going to mean different enabling technologies, middleware, social hooks. So I think for the next 3 to 5, 7 years, we're going to see a boom the likes of which we've not seen in gaming. And I think that's going to inure to the benefit of everything that we're talking about up here. It's going to be reach, it's going to be audience, it's going to be content, it's going to be for games publishers when you're talking about titles, that have decades of brand equities. They're in a subscription service, they can actually monetize that long tail in a way they've never been able to before. For a subscription price, you're going to get a fixed price. People are going to be able to access tens of thousands of titles, and that's going to give the opportunity to reintroduce some of those wonderful titles at the beginning of competitive gaming, like Quake and Doom and Half-Life and StarCraft, all of that. So I think there's going to be this really fun renaissance of rediscovery and also discovery.
Is this it for consoles? Is it finally happening?
No, and that's it.
I'm supposed to be getting my kid a PS4 tomorrow. Should I not do that? No, I'm serious. It's his 10th birthday, and should I not be doing that? Should I get?
I mean, I feel like we've been hearing that song
Yeah,
for
okay.
many,
So I
many,
still
many
get the-
years.
I don't think it's
I know,
going.
Peter, you should probably tell them about Shadow, huh?
Pardon me?
Probably tell them about Shadow.
Yeah,
I had it as
It's a PS4.
Oh, Shadow, is that a better console? Hey, we'll talk after. Question right here. Tell us who you are.
I'm Kevin. I'm with Candy Partners. And curious, how do you think about creating a league around a game and the lifespan of that game? Like, you have Fortnite come along. It's not an e-sport, right? But it's taken hold with all these kids. You've created leagues around a specific game. What happens if that game just gets tired and people get, and want to move on to something else? Are all those owners, are leagues looking at the next game coming along saying, okay, we're going to partner with that gaming company and create a new league around it? How do you think about that?
That's a good question.
So just to be clear, I'm not the game publisher, so it's not my IP, right? So if any of you guys are watching, I'm not putting words in your mouth. This is my opinion, right? So here's what I think is happening. For many years, eSports was kind of the tail, a marketing tail to the dog, which was like the growth of the game itself. And increasingly, publishers are seeing that through a more formal eSports infrastructure and architecture, they can actually create a means to accelerate the relevance of their game, not just in a short term, but for the long term. Now, that doesn't mean that every single version looks exactly the same. I mean, but take Overwatch League, which is, I think, the most formal, fixed structure, geolocated league that looks and acts and walks and quacks like a traditional sports league. I think that the ambition there, to some degree, is that by bringing on partners with skills and capabilities and capital, like a Bob Kraft or a Brian Roberts and Comcast, or an AEG and Lionsgate and Milken family, or Stan Kroenke, and plugging into know-how and venues and distribution in all of these key markets around the world, you're going to create this distributed network of marketers that are supporting and propping up to some degree the relevancy of your game. So that's one thing I'd give you to think about. The other is kind of the life cycle argument about games is a little bit overstated, I think. Certainly with respect to like these infrastructure-based leagues. I mean, Counter-Strike has been around 20 years. It's still going strong, and it's about to enter perhaps its most aggressive growth phase because it's being adopted increasingly throughout Asia. 25 years of sustained relevancy and growth around the world is something that I think, for example, the NFL would kill for. I think the NHL would love to be more relevant in large economies. So I think every kind of sports-based content distributor or IP holder is thinking about that same question. It's not an esports only thing. And then finally, with respect to Fortnite or Apex, for example, what I think is going to happen is that you're going to see game publishers, not necessarily the big four that Peter identified, but others that have a hit, a breakthrough hit, and they have a moment in time to capitalize on that. And being able to spin up an esport league that feels very relevant and feels very credible and has the kind of brands involved that we're talking about, whether it's our Immortals brand or a Cloud9 or a Team Liquid or whomever else, that immediately adds energy and credibility to that league. And so I think in the future Epic, the future Apex, they will see leagues spring up very quickly with a consistent group of team partners who can kind of rally around the cause to take advantage of that slice of time where their game is like very relevant in a moment in time.
We've got probably time for one or two more. There's one in the back, then we'll come up front.
I'm Carlos. I work at Eldridge, focused on the space. A question for everyone, and perhaps more for Peter and Kristen. How do you guys think about the competing incentives for high-performing players to go the influencer route, which is consistently being more monetized, especially as Twitch grows, or going pro? I mean, today, obviously, Twitch is partnering with the teams, and it's a very good relationship. But over the long term, as Twitch becomes better and better at doing what they do, are the players so different in terms of their performance skill, technical skill in the game, and desire to perform in front of a camera that you never end up competing for talent, or do we have to think about talent a different way in the search for the best players and where they go?
I think you and I, we're two sides of that coin, right? Like from my perspective, I'm not sure that I see the choice that has to be made there. Like absolutely there are many players who are performing at the highest level as athletes and are also either camera ready because they were born that way or have been trained to be that way, right? So there absolutely is room right now for both of those things to exist side by side on Twitch. But I think you've hit upon something that we were talking about earlier, right? Which is when people age out of being an esports athlete, which they do quite young, how prepare, is the best way to prepare them for life after esports to actually have ensured that they've become really smart at being influencers and making content while they were an esports athlete so that they naturally move into the next phase of their careers?
Yeah, I would just add, I agree with that, but there's also, again, traditional analogies there, right? Ronaldo's got 250 million people following him on social media, and he'll clearly be a personality that will prevail and have a long career in broadcast media. But again, I would fall back to it is so early. I think there's going to be so many permutations of how that's going to look and feel at the end of the day. We hope that this trend of them aging out so young, and we're seeing it, the beginnings of it is going to start to trend out the other direction. A lot of that just had to do with the opportunities that existed for these kids after, being 21 and a half years old, which is like the average age of retirement. So, that is, yeah, I know that's true. But it's rapidly changing. But again, I think it is such a dynamic conversation. It is so very early. But again, I think the discourse that's going back and forth between the constituencies is a very healthy one.
Yeah, Kristen, I'd just say that not all of us are so blessed to be camera ready from birth. It's a skill. We have one more question here, and then we'll wrap.
Yeah, my name is Paul. I work for an investment firm in Dubai, and sitting in that part of the world and looking at the U.S. perspective, it's phenomenal to see what's happening across China, South Korea, through the Middle East, going into India. Right, and there's two aspects to my question. First is, socially, there could be a huge issue here, because esports in those worlds are starting to define themselves as gambling, right? And the way the gambling laws work, and we got Red Bull sponsoring a platform I know in Dubai, and these young poor kids in Pakistan can get on their phone and make $15 million by winning. The top person from Pakistan won that big tournament, right? Being sponsored by this. So when you think about League of Legends in 2017, Gen G, that's sponsored with this kid I know in Dubai, who actually put on an eSports competition, E-Academy, with 100,000 people. That League of Legends tournament had 30,000 people in the stadium looking at two Teletron screens. It was phenomenal, but they were streaming 200 million people from China. This is a huge number game and a huge social issue. And I was just kind of curious how you guys are thinking about the social issue around this, because it's really becoming, esports is turning into gambling and getting out of the poor.
Yeah, maybe just a very quick response from anybody who wants to jump in and try to answer that. I mean, it's a big, tough question.
Well, yeah, quickly. So I don't know the extent to which esports has become gambling necessarily. There's certainly, and there's going to be a distinction depending on which jurisdiction, whether you're talking about gambling as we define it here, or skill-based gaming, and a bunch of other things. And obviously, there are all sorts of different things that people are gambling on now. Esports being one of them, but I think it's a consequence of global scale and people's ability to watch the same thing or participate in the same piece of content globally at the same time. So there are going to be markets, and people are going to create that. I mean, I think again, a lot of technologically why this is so interesting to me is these are amongst the many problems and things that we need to solve and infrastructure that we need to build to address in order for this to really scale. And we need to start from the perspective that it's a global phenomenon. The numbers you're talking about are real. People are engaging in this. We need to figure out, forget gambling. I mean, just prize money. Cross-border payments, microtransactions, theft and loss and fraud, and I mean all this stuff needs to be figured out in a way that aligns with the way people are actually engaging with this content. So for sure, it's something that'll come up.
And I was in Dubai last week, so you and I should connect offline.
There you go. We'll do our networking afterwards. Thank you all so much. Thanks to the panel. Thank you to Milken Institute.